There's something strange about the human brain. The moment you're told don't watch this movie, it suddenly becomes the only thing you have to see. Parents, teachers, even TV warnings did the opposite of their job. They turned certain films into irresistible forbidden fruit. But which ones had kids sneaking VHS tapes, borrowing DVDs, or staying up way too late? Let's take a look at the movies we all watched because we weren't allowed. The Exorcist, 1973. Few films carried a reputation so terrifying that kids didn't just want to watch it, they dared each other to. The Exorcist was whispered about on playgrounds like an urban legend. Everyone had a cousin, a neighbor, or an older sibling who swore they couldn't sleep for a week after seeing it. Naturally, that only made it more appealing. The movie followed a young girl who became the center of an unexplainable, horrifying transformation, and audiences at the time claimed it was unlike anything they'd ever seen. Some theaters even handed out barf bags during screenings. Parents thought they were protecting kids by saying, "Absolutely not." But all that did was guarantee kids would find a way. The practical effects were disturbingly lifelike, and the atmosphere was drenched in dread from start to finish. What made it even scarier was how serious the film treated its story. It wasn't campy horror. It was unsettling in a way that crawled under your skin. For kids who managed to sneak a copy late at night, the reward was equal parts bragging rights and sleepless nights. Forbidden movies always work like this. The scarier or stranger it is, the more we want it. The Exorcist was the ultimate example, too shocking for adults to let us near, and therefore the exact movie we had to see. Friday the 13th, 1980. For kids in the 80s, watching a Friday the 13th movie wasn't just entertainment. It was practically a rite of passage. The formula was simple. A group of unsuspecting young people head to a summer camp, and one by one, they meet their end in increasingly shocking ways. Parents and guardians saw nothing but violence, but kids saw the ultimate thrill ride. The first film set the stage with its lakeside setting, creepy atmosphere, and a shocking twist most didn't see coming. But as the sequels rolled out almost yearly, the reputation only grew. Jason Voorhees, with his hockey mask and machete, became one of the most recognizable figures in horror. Kids whispered about him on schoolyards, and video rental stores quietly raked in cash from the curious. Part of the draw was how grown-up the films felt. They were loud, gory, and gleefully over the top, the very opposite of safe Saturday morning cartoons. Parents banned them for their chaos, which made kids want them even more. For many, this series marked the very first time they experienced the rush of a proper horror film, watching from behind pillows, gripping friends' arms, or sneaking a peek when they were supposed to be asleep. Friday the 13th wasn't just scary. It was rebellion captured on VHS. Watching it felt like breaking a rule, and that was half the fun. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. If one film ever embodied the phrase forbidden fruit, it was Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange. The movie's reputation was so notorious that it became a challenge. Could you handle watching something so many adults considered dangerous? The film followed Alex DeLarge, a young man with a taste for chaos, in a dystopian future where society experiments with extreme forms of control. The striking visuals, the unforgettable music, and the surreal storytelling made it unlike anything else. But what kids really latched on to was the movie's legend. In the UK, Kubrick himself pulled the film from circulation for decades after it was linked to real-life violence. That ban only added to its mythic status. Kids who managed to find a copy felt like they were unlocking a hidden vault of cinema. The movie's bold style made it both confusing and mesmerizing. But even if younger viewers didn't understand every message, they felt its raw energy. It was the kind of film you whispered about, trading stories about scenes that felt almost too much to process. Adults tried to shield kids by locking it away, but all that did was give it an irresistible glow. Watching A Clockwork Orange wasn't just about the movie itself, it was about proving you could handle the kind of cinema that adults thought you weren't ready for. And that's exactly why kids kept chasing it. Basic Instinct, 1992. Few films in the early 90s sparked as much controversy or as much curiosity as Basic Instinct. The movie became legendary not just for its story, but for the whispers surrounding one particular scene. For many, that scene was the reason it was banned at home. and that was enough to make kids sneak around to see it. The plot followed a detective investigating a mysterious writer who may or may not be a murderer. Twists, interrogations, and cat-and-mouse games kept the tension high, but it was the movie's reputation that kept people talking. Newspapers, critics, and late-night TV hosts turned it into a cultural firestorm, and once something hits the mainstream like that, younger audiences can't help but want to know what all the fuss is about. For kids, it wasn't really about the story. It was about watching something you knew you weren't supposed to. That sense of crossing a line, of sneaking into a movie theater or borrowing a tape, gave Basic Instinct its lasting place in the Forbidden Films Hall of Fame. Parents thought they were keeping kids away from something too adult, but really, they were making it the hottest ticket in town. Watching Basic Instinct was less about suspense and more about curiosity. And when curiosity gets mixed with rebellion, you can bet kids will find a way. Scarface, 1983. If there's one film that became the ultimate poster child for rebellion, it's Scarface. Kids didn't just watch it, they quoted it, worshipped it, and even hung posters of Tony Montana on their bedroom walls. Which is hilarious when you think about it, because parents everywhere considered it way too dangerous for kids to see. The movie followed Tony Montana, a Cuban immigrant who clawed his way up Miami's underworld with ambition, greed, and sheer force of will. Al Pacino's performance was explosive, the dialogue unforgettable, and the style soaked in neon-drenched 80s cool. But for parents, it was a nightmare. Wall-to-wall profanity, relentless violence, and a main character who was as magnetic as he was destructive. Naturally, this only made kids more obsessed. For many, Scarface wasn't just a crime story, it was a fantasy of living large, defying authority, and grabbing power at any cost. The fact that adults despised it just added to its rebellious aura. By the late 80s and 90s, Scarface was being passed around like a secret code of coolness. Rappers quoted it, teens imitated it, and suddenly this gritty gangster flick became a cultural badge of honor. Watching it felt less like breaking a rule and more like joining a club. Scarface proved one thing. The more adults warn kids away, the stronger the legend grows. And Tony Montana's legend? Untouchable. Showgirls, 1995. There are movies you weren't supposed to see because they were scary. And then there's Showgirls, banned in some households simply because of its reputation. What made this one legendary wasn't critical praise, because critics shredded it to pieces. It was the fact that everyone whispered about how wild it was, and the more adults tried to keep it away, the more it turned into the movie kids had to find. The story followed a young woman trying to make it in Las Vegas. Glitz, rivalry, ambition. It had all the elements of a glossy drama, but it was the film's rating that made it infamous. The dreaded NC-17 label instantly signaled, "Not for you," which of course translated perfectly into, "You need to see this." Showgirls bombed at the box office, but it thrived in homes, passed around by those curious enough to see what all the outrage was about. For younger viewers, it wasn't about cinematic brilliance, it was about being in on the forbidden experience. The film's campy vibe and over-the-top performances ended up giving it a strange kind of second life, cementing it as a cult classic. For many, Showgirls wasn't a movie you just watched. It was a test of how far you'd go to defy the no. Adults tried to kill its reputation, but they accidentally created a legend. South Park, 1999. Now, here's a movie that practically made fun of the very idea of being banned. South Park was already one of the most notorious shows on television, loved by kids, hated by adults. So when the creators announced a full-length movie with a title that promised even more outrageousness, kids everywhere couldn't wait to sneak to look. The film followed the South Park kids sneaking into an R-rated Canadian movie, only to unleash chaos back home when their parents find out. If that sounds familiar, it's because it mirrored real life perfectly. Kids really were sneaking into this movie, repeating every word they weren't supposed to know while parents fumed. Packed with profanity, wild humor, and satirical punches, the movie wasn't subtle. It was a giant dare wrapped in animation, taunting parents and giving kids endless new material to annoy adults with. Some schools even banned kids from quoting it, which only made it cooler. For fans of the show, this wasn't just a movie. It was a badge of honor. Watching South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, meant you were officially part of the rebellious club, a generation laughing at the very rules designed to stop them. Requiem for a Dream, 2000. If there was ever a film that felt like an art project and a nightmare rolled into one, it was Requiem for a Dream. Darren Aronofsky didn't just tell a story, he slammed viewers into the harsh world of addiction with a style so intense that even adults struggled to watch it. Parents hated the idea of kids even knowing this movie existed, and that's exactly why younger viewers went searching for it. The story followed four characters chasing their dreams only to spiral deeper into destructive choices. The editing was frantic, the visuals haunting, and the music unforgettable. For many teens in the early 2000s, this movie carried the same whispered reputation as that one film you can't handle. What set it apart was that it didn't glamorize anything. If anything, it showed the crushing consequences of bad decisions. But because it was shocking, it carried the allure of being off limits. Teenagers looking for something darker and deeper than the usual blockbuster found themselves watching through parted fingers, unsure if they regretted it or felt proud of surviving it. Requiem for a Dream wasn't popcorn entertainment, it was an endurance test. And for anyone who managed to finish it, the bragging rights were undeniable. Caligula, 1979. Some movies are remembered for their artistry, others for their controversy. Caligula? It's remembered for both. This Roman epic wasn't just a history lesson, it was one of the most infamous movies ever made, packed with enough outrageousness to get it banned in several countries. The film attempted to tell the story of Emperor Caligula, one of Rome's most notorious rulers. On paper, that sounds like an ambitious historical project. In reality, it became a lightning rod for scandal. Reports spread of behind-the-scenes clashes, a chaotic production, and scenes that pushed way past the boundaries of what mainstream cinema usually allowed. Parents weren't just wary of it, they outright forbade it, which meant kids wanted it even more. Sneaking into this movie felt like pulling off a heist. And even if most younger viewers couldn't understand the political undertones, they definitely understood that they were watching something they weren't supposed to. Caligula's controversy still lingers decades later, but its forbidden reputation is what cemented it into legend. It wasn't about whether the film was good or bad, it was about the fact that it was dangerous, and that was more than enough to keep kids curious. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Grimy, brutal, and terrifyingly real, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the horror movie that rewrote the rules. Tobe Hooper's low-budget nightmare felt like a documentary gone wrong, a relentless plunge into madness that was too much for many theaters to even show. Parents saw it as pure nightmare fuel, and so naturally kids lined up to sneak a look. The movie followed a group of friends who stumbled upon a family of cannibals deep in rural Texas. It was relentless in tone, sun-bleached horror with no escape, capped by the unforgettable introduction of Leatherface, chainsaw roaring. For kids, this wasn't just another scary movie. This was the scary movie, the one you had to see to prove your bravery. The film was banned in some countries and heavily censored in others, but its legend grew with every restriction. Even years later, kids were still sneaking VHS copies into sleepovers, daring each other not to look away. Texas Chainsaw Massacre didn't need polished effects or glossy production, it thrived on rawness. And for every kid who swore they could handle it, there was another who ended up hiding under the blanket halfway through. That's what made it unforgettable. Pulp Fiction, 1994. Some movies weren't just films, they were cultural earthquakes. Pulp Fiction was one of those. Quentin Tarantino's breakout hit had everything parents hated and everything kids wanted. Violence, crime, fast-talking characters, and dialogue that felt like a secret code. Add in the fact that critics and award shows showered it with praise, and suddenly this not-for-kids film became the ultimate must-watch. The film told multiple intertwining stories about gangsters, hitmen, and people who made bad decisions with style. What set it apart was Tarantino's bold style, long conversations about cheeseburgers, random dance scenes, and sudden bursts of violence. For adults, that blend made it dangerous. For kids, it made it irresistible. By the mid-90s, it wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural badge. People quoted Samuel L. Jackson's fiery speeches, imitated John Travolta and Uma Thurman's dance, and laughed at jokes they barely understood. Parents banning it didn't stop anything. If anything, it fueled the obsession. For many, watching Pulp Fiction too young was less about following the story and more about stepping into a world that felt cool, edgy, and forbidden. Tarantino's masterpiece may have been built for adults, but it became the film every teenager wanted to sneak just to prove they were in the know. Alien 1979. Long before superhero blockbusters dominated the world, Alien was the film haunting kids' imaginations. Even if you hadn't seen it, you'd heard the stories. A creature bursting out of someone's chest, the scariest monster design ever put on film, and a tagline that said it all: "In space, no one can hear you scream." If parents heard that, they immediately said, "No way." Directed by Ridley Scott, Alien was science fiction blended with pure horror. The design of the creature, combined with the claustrophobic setting of a spaceship, made the whole thing feel nightmarishly real. Younger viewers weren't supposed to see it, but VHS rentals and late-night cable ensured they did. The infamous chestburster scene became a rite of passage. Kids would dare each other to watch it, and some couldn't even finish the film because of how tense it was. But those who did walked away with a new definition of fear and bragging rights for surviving something so intense. Alien wasn't just scary, it was groundbreaking. It showed how terror could thrive even in the far reaches of space. And for kids sneaking a watch, it felt like discovering a forbidden planet. Parents thought it would scar kids for life. Maybe it did, but in the coolest way possible. Natural Born Killers, 1994. If controversy had a face in the 1990s, it was Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers. Parents hated it, critics debated it, and kids couldn't resist it. The movie was accused of glorifying crime, blamed for influencing real-world violence, and banned in several countries, which meant it instantly earned a spot on the We Have to Watch This list. The story followed Mickey and Mallory, two lovers on a violent cross-country spree. But the movie wasn't just about crime. It was about how the media sensationalizes it. The wild editing, the chaotic tone, and the mix of styles made it feel like one giant fever dream. Adults saw chaos. Kids saw something bold and unforgettable. Adding to the legend was the fact that Tarantino wrote the original story before disowning the final product. That detail alone made it cooler to younger audiences looking for something edgy. And once word spread that countries outright banned it, curiosity skyrocketed. For kids who managed to sneak a watch, it wasn't about understanding every theme, it was about experiencing something dangerous, something that felt like it wasn't meant for them. Natural Born Killers thrived on being forbidden, and that's exactly why kids couldn't look away. Watership Down, 1978. Now here's the biggest trick of them all, an animated movie about rabbits that traumatized an entire generation. Watership Down looked harmless at first glance, cute animals, colorful animation, a storybook premise. Parents thought it was a safe choice, except it wasn't. The movie adapted Richard Adams' novel about rabbits searching for a new home, but it didn't shy away from the brutality of survival. The violence was intense, the themes were heavy, and the imagery was so shocking that many kids were left in tears. Parents who caught on quickly banned it, but by then, the damage and the legend was done. Schoolyards filled with stories of how the bunny movie wasn't what it seemed. That reputation turned it into a dare. Could you sit through Watership Down without freaking out? Unlike other films on this list, it didn't need an R rating or bans to make it forbidden. Its disguise as a kid-friendly cartoon made it even more haunting. For those who watched, it became an unforgettable memory. Watership Down proved that sometimes the scariest movies are the ones you least expect. Wild Things, 1998. In the late 90s, Wild Things was the movie everyone whispered about. It wasn't a family-friendly blockbuster or a respected drama. It was a deliberately scandalous thriller, dripping with sleaze and twists. The moment adults started saying, "You can't see this," younger viewers everywhere started plotting how they could. The story involved betrayal, conspiracies, and tangled lies in a Florida town. But the truth is, it was the movie's reputation that made it iconic. For teens, this wasn't just about the plot. It was about the thrill of sneaking a look at something adults clearly didn't want them near. It helped that the movie was stylish, pulpy, and full of shocking turns. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. Rental stores couldn't keep it on the shelves because curious viewers kept trying to sneak it past their parents. Wild Things never pretended to be high art. It was campy, messy, and unforgettable. And because it was off limits, it became part of the forbidden film canon. For many, it wasn't the story that stuck. It was the memory of staying up late, lowering the volume, and knowing you were watching something you weren't supposed to. So, there you have it. The 15 forbidden films we all somehow managed to see. They terrified us, shocked us, and sometimes even scarred us. But they also defined a generation of sneaky movie watching. The harder adults tried to keep them hidden, the more legendary they became. Which one did you watch in secret? Drop your answer in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of the movies we were never supposed to see.